So metabolic health really is synonymous with quality of life. It's very hard to have a good quality of life, perform optimally, feel your best, whether that's at work, whether that's with your kids, whether that's in the gym, if you're not metabolically healthy. Welcome to Sammillerscience, where you're joining me nearly 2 decades into my personal journey to bridge the gap between macros, metabolism, muscle, and medicine. If you're joining me, thanks for trusting me to elevate your health and realize your true potential. Each week and inside every episode, I'll be sharing methods and models from my coaching journey and my personal experience, as well as the science that you need to achieve whatever specific goals you're working on in your life. Let's jump in to today's show. Welcome back. Inside today's show, we have a special featured interview for you. Over the past 7 to 10 years, I've had the amazing opportunity to collaborate with so many wonderful creators in the health and fitness space. And anytime we're talking about nutrition, metabolism, hormones, gut health, anti-aging, performance, really any topic that would be pertinent for you guys to listen to here in the Sam Miller Science feed, my team and I will take these episodes and we'll either play the full Q&A interview, mashups, or take some of the best monologue style content and bring it to you here in the feed. These topics are meant to showcase past interviews and things that I think are either important, trending, or relevant for your understanding, either in your own health and fitness journey or as a health and fitness coach. I appreciate you guys tuning in. Without further ado, let's jump into this featured replay. So I would say we have two vastly different populations right now in terms of avatars. If I had to nail it down into two buckets, one is kind of the sedentary lifestyle, standard American diet, people who are headed towards being overweight or obese. They're insulin resistant, meaning essentially we'll see higher blood glucose elevations, higher fasting insulin scores, higher A1C as measured by your lab work. And typically these folks have increased body fat levels and inflammation, can be impacting other areas of their health as well, risk factors for cardiovascular disease and things like that. But that's kind of one population. And then I think what we see in the fitness industry is now that dieting has been sort of commoditized, there's a lot of men and women who've basically been dieting since they were like 12 years old, or have tried some form of diet, or tried, something from an infomercial or some type of get lean quick workout, or they're going to boot camp, and they haven't necessarily had the best structured program, but they've engaged in some form of physical fitness or nutrition or dietary restriction. And so for that population, the reason we're seeing changes in their metabolic health is really, in a lot of cases, underfeeding, or it's just kind of perpetually pursuing that calorie deficit, maybe not successfully. And so their health is often impacted by, they'd benefit from maybe spending some time devoted towards strength training, eating more maintenance calories or around there, versus kind of this yo-yo dieting pattern that we see. So there's obviously a subset of the population that's not obese or overweight, but they're not necessarily metabolically healthy, or their health isn't optimized, their hormones are not optimized, they don't feel their best, they're fatigued, low energy levels, poor cognition. And then the other side, we have more of what people would think of the conventional unhealthy person, right? Someone who's put on a lot of weight, they're making poor food choices, they're not exercising, right? That's kind of the classic recipe for poor metabolic health. But we have to realize is there's plenty of people, millions of people on this other side too, where they don't have great metabolic health. They're not responding to the stimulus of training the way that they would think that they would. And they're having a very hard time being consistent with their nutrition as well. So those would be the big two. Now, are there subcategories within that? Of course, but just for general understanding, I'd say those are some of the avatars we tend to see. So we have basically a qualitative understanding of this and quantitative. So more like subjective feedback is you have good energy levels, you're getting good sleep, you can manage your stress, you have the ability to regulate your appetite, hunger, and cravings. You're not going from this state of basically being incredibly hungry and overeating, and then your blood sugar is all over the place, and then you have a dip after each meal. You're actually able to eat and have some time between those meals and regulate that blood sugar, control your hunger and cravings. If you're this roller coaster of hunger and cravings and your blood sugar is all over the place, that's not metabolically healthy. And there's usually a reason for that kind of beneath the surface. We can always go into that. So that's more qualitative feedback in terms of your subjective feelings of well-being. You're probably not going to have the best energy levels. You're probably going to be fatigued. You may even, if you've accumulated enough weight and you are insulin resistant, you've got risk factors for sleep apnea, probably not sleeping super great. You may even need a CPAP. So we start to see all of these general lifestyle factors kind of add up into a complete change in quality of life. So metabolic health really is synonymous with quality of life. It's very hard to have a good quality of life, perform optimally, feel your best, whether that's at work, whether that's with your kids, whether that's in the gym, if you're not metabolically healthy. So it's kind of one side of it. Now, the other way we could define it from a quantitative perspective would be looking at certain biomarkers, blood work. We could also look at things related to body composition. I like blood work because it actually is giving you the picture of your metabolic status quo and internal health. Just because you're a certain pant size or dress size doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have the same lab work as the other person who's a dress size 6 or a jean size 32 for men. There's differences, right? Based on our family history, based on how we're eating, how we're training, all of those things accumulate to impact that metabolic health. So on the quantitative side, I would be looking at, your basic lab panels, which is basically a complete blood count and metabolic panel, thyroid function, reproductive hormones, levels of inflammation as measured by what's called C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker. We'd want to look at your insulin and blood sugar regulation. That's just for starters. And then vitamin and mineral status would be another good thing to check. And we have proxies for those markers in some of those basic panels that I mentioned, or more specific indicators. So for example, you can get a vitamin D score, right? Or a RBC magnesium. It's going to be very specific for that nutrient versus there are other markers that are kind of a backdoor way to approximate your nutrient status. So I would say we have a numerical way to look at it, and then we have more of the quality of life and subjective component. Both of those can be off, or maybe you feel okay, but there's some stuff going on beneath the surface for a number of reasons that could be adding up over time, or people are kind of masking how they're feeling by using certain things or abusing certain compounds. That can be the case for some people, but I'd say the biggest thing for metabolic health is you're actually on your way to living your best life, right? And also with longevity in mind too, not just that short-term performance and physique change. But a metabolically healthy person will respond a bit better to the stimulus for physique change. So if that's training, they're probably more receptive to that training stimulus. If it's nutrition, they're probably seeing results a little bit faster versus the person who's not super metabolically healthy. They may actually struggle. So getting that same stimulus doesn't mean they're going to get the same degree of results. And that's why I always refer to coaches as kind of adaptation managers, because that's basically what we're doing in a transformation. Is you apply the stimulus, how did the body adapt? And so really we're looking at physiology. So metabolic health is really an interesting study of adaptive physiology, which is pretty much how our body is responding to our environment, the foods we eat, the training that we pursue, right? That's really what the conversation is. I think people just get a little overwhelmed by the idea of metabolism, when in reality, if you were to look it up, it's basically just like bodily processes, right? Or chemical reactions. So that sounds scary, right? But it's really just a number of chemical messengers and cascades and enzymes, like different things are happening. You don't need to know that at a granular level. You just need to understand kind of that 10,000 foot view of how I take control of my metabolic health. So for example, to give you guys a little more context. So when I talk about kind of 5 pillars for managing metabolism, I talk about managing your appetite, because if you don't manage your appetite, so for example, if you're on like a super low protein diet, then you're probably going to be hungry all the time. So number 1, manage your appetite. It's very hard to be adherent if you don't manage your appetite. 2 is maximizing adherence. 3 is maximizing absorption, because if we have really poor gut health and we're not actually digesting and assimilating those foods, we're not going to see the best results with our nutrition. We need to actually mind our micronutrient status. So many people hyperfixate on calories, but they're not eating nutrient dense whole foods that provide vitamins and minerals. And then we need to mitigate metabolic adaptation. So that means let's cut the yo-yo dieting. Let's not always try to be in a deficit. Let's be intentional about our fat loss, and then have seasons where maybe I'm focused on strength or performance, or maybe I'm focused on maintaining this new weight loss that I've achieved, versus I'm constantly on the next thing, or buying the next diet book, or vegan and keto, and going from one end of the spectrum to the other, which is what we see with a lot of chronic dieters. So those 5 things, once I have that structure in place, if I'm doing those 5, now I can kind of adjust the toggles that are available to me which would be things like, how much energy or calories am I consuming? What is my exact protein intake? Is that protein intake managing my appetite? If not, maybe I need to reevaluate things like my protein, fiber, water intake. So just getting people to start to think critically versus, well, Dr. So-and-so said this online about nutrition, and this book says I can't eat this food and I can't eat that food. Well, how does that food make you feel? And how is that food serving you? And so I like to teach critical thinking so that someone's not just a robot when they go to the store or just following it because some influencer told them to buy some product. It actually gives them the ability to fend for themselves. And that way, when you run out of food in your house and you have to go out and you make a decision around what to eat, you actually have some parameters to make a good decision for the rest of your life. It allows you to be more autonomous than, oh, well, I need to eat 6 ounces of this and XYZ, so on and so forth. So we start there. And then I think, yes, of course, measure and learn what portions are appropriate for your body type, and your goals, right? So that's going to impact in your current body size. But if we don't have some sort of thought process or framework, people are really going to struggle because it's like you tell them what time it is. They don't know how the clock works or that there's 24 hours in a day. So if I didn't know that there were 24 hours in a day and you told me that it was like 2 p.m., that wouldn't really mean much to me, right? I need to understand the system that fits into. And then I think people can begin to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. So what, in your opinion, is the order of importance when it comes to 3 things? What I'm eating, how much I'm eating, and when I'm eating it. Of those 3 things, what order would you place those?
Super tough because I think what you're eating impacts how much you're eating. Just because the other 2 are so important, I'm going to put when third, but not because it's not important. We see this with night shift workers. We see this with first responders, people who work. We were chatting earlier. So for example, even when you're traveling and there's jet lag, circadian disruption, that can impact blood sugar regulation, inflammation. So I do want to state that it is very important. However, what we're eating and how much we're eating are so impactful that if we did not account for those and we only focused on when we were eating, we'd still probably end up in trouble, right? I could eat at the perfect time, but if I'm going to Wendy's and Popeyes every day and overconsume, like I'm ordering 5 things off the menu, blowing my calories, I'm going to be in a pretty poor state of metabolic health. So as much as we do need to focus on the when, especially if you're someone like a nurse, police officer, firefighter, pilot, anesthesiologist, working in a hospital, those populations do need to show some TLC versus if you're on a normal sleep-wake schedule, you may not have as much issues with the when. And I do think people eating a lot of their calories at night can impact sleep quality and their meal decisions and metabolic health. So we're talking about the what and how much. I think what you're eating does impact how much you're eating, but how much you're eating in and of itself is such a powerful driver of poor metabolic health. Like overeating is one of the fastest ways to create insulin resistance, inflammation, neuroinflammation, depression, right? So as those calories climb above where they should be, and the longer you do that for, you do set yourself up for a number of different chronic diseases, conditions, and illnesses. Mm-hmm. So how much is very important. We know that calories and energy are going to be part of that. Now, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Is this for what I'm eating and how much am I eating? Am I allowed to actually measure it? Or is it a situation where I only get to pick what I'm eating and then that's going to drive how much I'm consuming?
I suppose I'm more so just asking for the audience member who wants to know which one to focus on. Obviously, the answer would be all 3 of these are important.
All 3 are super important.
You need to place an equal emphasis on all 3. But a lot of times I think people, especially the when, I see people that are focused on the when they're eating instead of the what they're eating.
Right,
and they are claiming they're having all these problems because it's like, I shouldn't eat fruit past 7 p.m. And I'm like, well, okay, I mean, if you're having other issues, most likely the first 2 characteristics, I would put the when you're eating dead last, the what you're eating first, and how much. I agree with what you're saying.
I think it's a 1A, 1B. Because I would say as much as you could try to count and quantify and measure, it's going to be harder if you're not eating good quality foods.
Exactly.
So eating better quality foods that are satiating, high in protein, essential amino acids, vitamins and minerals, fiber, antioxidants, it does make it a little bit harder to overeat. That doesn't mean it's possible to do. Someone could probably do that and prove me wrong. But if I had to take someone with very limited nutritional knowledge, education, or limited ability to measure their food, they don't really understand that yet, and I have a very short window of time to teach them, at least if I can prioritize certain foods first, I might displace some of those other foods, right? So it's kind of the theory of displacement. Like if you were in a bath, if you sit down in a bathtub full of water and we actually, the water will begin to rise and then overflow depending on the level of water in there, and we drop you into the tub, that's going to disperse and change what's going on with the fluid. So I think what is key now, all research related to nutrition, metabolic health, insulin sensitivity, we know that if you take someone who is metabolically unhealthy or at risk for so many of these chronic diseases and you restrict their calories, undoubtedly they will get healthier. So caloric restriction, the how much, is still very, very important. I think what people fail to understand is a lot of what we were talking about in terms of metabolism earlier. In the calories in, calories out conversation, the calories out portion is adaptive. That means it's dependent on your lifestyle and your metabolic health or internal health, meaning TDEE can change, right? When people argue about calories in, calories out on the internet, calories in, yes, that's my intake. That's what I'm measuring. That's what I'm consuming. But if I'm going to have that conversation around calories and I'm saying calories out, well, it's not just calories out. Calories out, what is calories out? Calories out is TDEE. What is TDEE? It's comprised of my basal metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate, my non-exercise activity, my exercise activity, and thermic effective food. Well, guess what? Thermic effective food is impacted by what types of food are in the calories in. Yes. If I talk about non-exercise activity, that's my lifestyle, right? That's going to impact it. We know that a number of different health conditions, PCOS for women, insulin resistance, so many different cases that we're seeing have a lower than predicted TDEE, and this is documented in human trials. This is not like my thing. We have evidence to support that they're going to have a lower than expected energy expenditure relative to what predictive calculations would show.
Meaning what? For the
meaning like for a layman's term, if you are a certain height and weight and you put it in a calculator for your calories and macros, and what it would say that your TDEE is, so total daily energy expenditure, it's lower than what that number is, meaning how you're actually maintaining, like what you're actually maintaining your weight at, or what you would need to get into to be in a deficit, is lower than the calculator would spit out. And the best way to actually check this is a 7-day food log and weigh yourself and see like, where were my calories? What was the average consumption over the 7 days relative to that scale weight? That's actually your maintenance calories versus predicted maintenance is not going to be as accurate in some cases, like chronic dieters who have restricted their calories severely over the years, or people with these health conditions. So if you are insulin resistant, overweight, if you have PCOS, hypothyroid, there's a number of conditions where that TDEE
type 2
is impacted.
diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes can impact it mainly because if they have a lot of body fat tissue, that body fat tissue is inherently inflammatory. Also having that level of fat and insulin resistance seems to impact energy expenditure as well as our hunger and satiety, which then again, now we're back to calories in again, because guess what impacts your calories in? Things like your mood, your appetite, your craving, like your mental state. So yes, calories are super important, and anyone who's expert in nutrition should tell you that energy intake is important. But there's other things that matter in that conversation, like energy availability, aka how much body fat do I have on my frame, right? That's a big consideration. So I look at total energy availability, not just energy in through the
Someone
diet.
with a lot of body fat would have a lot of energy availability, or
Correct.
less.
Yeah, think about it as like all that body fat stored is fuel. So that impacts what's going on from a metabolic perspective. So simply put, I'm kind of just putting that into this umbrella of energy availability. Versus let's take a female, like a female gymnast who's very low body fat, who doesn't eat a lot. That's a low energy availability state. So if we look at two extremes, like an athlete, and then we also look at someone who's like the sedentary couch potato with a ton of body fat, right? That's very, very clear. Okay, there's a difference in not only the calories that they're eating, but also what's actually stored on that person's body. So in terms of the how much you eat, undoubtedly incredibly important. But I think it's hard to control how much you eat if we're not thinking about what we eat. So that's why I'm going to put what we eat up top. And because there's so much new evidence coming out in terms of things like endocrine disrupting chemicals, pesticides on our foods, and people with certain health conditions where if they're not paying attention to what they eat, how certain foods are impacting their gut health, their immune system, hormonal function, etc. So I'm going to balance both here. In my world, I teach these as 1A, 1B. And that's why with the metabolism conversation, remember we started with stress and energy? I'm including that in the metabolic health conversation, but it's a lot easier to control energy when I'm actually choosing good quality, nutrient dense foods that help me manage my appetite instead of putting me on this vicious cycle of, oh, well, I was able to fit Bojangles in my macros. Well, guess what? It's really hard. I don't even know if you guys have Bojangles here. Jack in the Box, right?
Yeah,
Or, you go wherever you go to some sort of drive-through, you eat the food, right? Could you make it work and finagle it for calories? Yes, but you might be pretty hungry after that.
It's poor calories.
And that's where the food log review or audit is so powerful. I'd rather take what you're currently doing and show you how to make it better and with some tweaks versus putting you on something that you're completely unfamiliar with that doesn't fit your lifestyle. Well, maybe by looking at your food log, I see, well, what times are you normally eating during the day and why are we eating at those times? Oh, you have to drop your kids off at school. Cool. So maybe this is actually a realistic breakfast for you. Or, hey, lunch is actually between work meetings. So that's why you're choosing this on the go option. How can we improve that and make that healthier? Dinner. Okay. Is that at home? Oh, it was actually after soccer practice. Gotcha. I understand. So then when you start to work with people who are parents or busy executives, or even with athletes, if they're on the road or someone who's traveling a lot, there's nuance to that nutritional conversation. And that's where I think there's something powerful about having the food log. And then if you can take that food log or just a basic dietary recall and pair it with something like labs and understand what's going on from a blood chemistry perspective, that supercharges your understanding of how you arrived at your current state of metabolic health, right?
Absolutely.
So my status quo has been driven by all of these repetitive decisions related to my nutrition. I've literally made choices for my whole entire adult life and my childhood, depending on how my parents raised me and fed me. All of those things have led to this moment of how my body has currently come to be, and the values that are reflected in the labs, and even the food choices that I'm making on a day-to-day basis, because my environment played a huge role in my nutritional education or lack thereof. And so when I have those two tools, we can begin to have a really amazing conversation about good nutrition for you, and then scaling it towards whatever your goals are. Cool. You want to perform and do like a sprint triathlon or something? Cool. If you're someone who's getting ready for powerlifting or bodybuilding, okay, that's a different goal. If you're someone who just wants to be lean, have abs, and have enough energy to hang with your kids on the weekend, cool, we can do that too. But having those two pieces of paper basically can be a great foundation for having this more education rich conversation. And I think that empowers people to then take control of their health versus this being like, well, this influencer said this and this magazine said that, and this is being marketed at the grocery store, and just because it's on the end cap doesn't mean it's healthy for you, right, as you're walking through the store.
Yeah.
So once we begin to see that we're in this like matrix and sea of information related to nutrition, and that it's our job to begin to navigate it in terms of what's best for ourselves, I think that's when people really can have the most powerful transformations.
Absolutely.